Əziz dostlar, GEOSIYASET verişinə baxırsınız. Bir-iki verişimiz qonağı BMT İnkisaf proqramının ölkədəki Rezident Nümayəndəsi cənab Alessandro FRAKASSETTI'dir. Mr. Alessandro, thank you very much for accepting us. It was a great pleasure to see you. I know you have a very tight schedule, but you find the time for us.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you for having me in your program.
It's a pleasure. Alessandro, usually we talk about UN. I just mentioned to you that I also had the honor and pleasure to work for UN projects in Azerbaijan. And UNDP doing a great job for country, and for sure, time to time it's humanitarian, non-political, and UN involved in certain process in country. And recently, UNDP adopted new country program for Azerbaijan, which is called the Country Program 21-25. And on what stage is program now implemented, and what is the future of this program in Azerbaijan? How you see that?
Yeah, thank you very much once again for having me in your program. So, as you know, UNDP has been in the country now since 1992. It was one of the first agencies to start work in Azerbaijan at a different time, at a very different times. And now, 30 years later, we find ourselves here with, as you say, a new country program that has been adopted in February of this year that lines up a number of priorities for the country that were agreed, of course, with the government of Azerbaijan. So on the one hand, we are looking at what we call inclusive growth. We're looking at supporting vulnerable groups, vulnerable people, whether it is women, youth, IDPs, for example, people with disabilities and other such groups. But also we work on skills, on job creation, on women empowerment projects, on tourism development, for example. So all areas that can help even the government and the country in their efforts to diversify the economy, to strengthen the human capital, and to ensure that it works towards the jobs of the future. The second area, of course, is the environmental area. Very important priorities for us, for the whole planet, right? So work on the climate, tackling the consequences of climate change. Here we have long time programs in support of the government efforts to reduce emissions, to meet the targets set up in the Paris Agreement, to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. And here also we work a lot on alternative source of energies, on energy efficiency. And so in those areas, you know, we're really trying to complement and to support national effort. And a third large areas in the areas of support international capacity, we call it. But really we are looking at, for example, supporting the efforts towards digitalization, working closely with the government in making sure innovation and digital solutions are brought to bear to an agenda of digital transformation for the country. But also we look at supporting, for example, the country on anything related to health, to procurement of medicines, related medicines there, into areas such as, you know, historically we were working on here, whether support into the border services or the demining efforts. So there are certainly areas of work here that we will be working over the next 5 years that will be quite important. Another area, for example, is the question of rural development and regional development. So supporting the development of the regions of Azerbaijan when there is most needed, whether it is small farmers, for example, in diversify and being able to sell their produce, or we are looking at youth, for example, giving them the skills to apply for a job and to have the jobs that is needed. A larger program there is the work that we do on modernizing the vocational education system. Here we are partnering with the European Union on modernizing, we will be modernizing over the next 5 years, 7 schools, further vocational education schools, from the curriculum to the modules to the equipment, and you know, to ensure that the needs of the market are reflected by what the schools are providing, right? To match those things. So you're looking at future jobs like ITs, for example, fashion or others, but also with jobs that the economy needs. You need people in agriculture, you need people in industry, and so on, and all in that trying to reevaluate, to give a full new image to the question of vocational education, because that is really preparing the youth for the jobs of the future. So these are all areas that we'll be working together with our partners, with the government, with international partners here over the next several years. In this case, it's 5 years. Now, of course, there are other areas that I'm sure we'll have time to discuss closer. One is, of course, the whole question of COVID support. Others is the question of recovery from the conflict. So those are all areas that we will plan to work closely here.
Alessandro, as I see, it's planned for 5 years, but for sure we covered many important activities, especially for Azerbaijan nowadays. It's important, as you said, industrial challenges on 21st century. It's IT technologies. For sure, President of the Azerbaijan Republic, Ilham Aliyev, mentioned about green cities, emission, environment, renewable energies. 5 years, you think it is enough, or you have plans for extension as well, or just it's like a pilot project and then will be extended? What is this?
Look, as I said, we have been here now already for 30 years. So the way we work is through these 5 years agreed programs. But our projects, they don't look at specifically these 5 years. Some of the projects will last longer, will be extended. We will have new phases of those projects. Clearly, you cannot expect big development outcomes, big development results in only 5 years. So of course we expect to support the country for as long as this support will be needed. We're here at the invitation of the government of Azerbaijan. So obviously it is important that our work is needed, is appreciated, and our role is to bring in funding, but it's also to bring in expertise, resources, best practices. Don't forget, we have 170, we are active in 170 countries around the world. Yeah. So you can imagine the amount of experience that we can bring to bear on a specific issue, the expertise. We have rosters of experts for different areas. One of the things about UNDP is that it's a very broad agency. So we are not focused only on one specific area. But we have to integrate, so to say, all the development challenges which are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Yeah. These are Sustainable Development Goals are goals agreed by heads of state, including Azerbaijan in 2015, and we have until 2030 to try to meet those goals. So in all those goals, you're looking at the broad spectrum of all development challenges, and so we are the agency, we are the program that is trying to integrate all these, or as many as possible of these priorities. So just to give you an example, when you look at, for example, of supporting small farmers, you're also looking at making sure that what you do does not impact the environment. If anything, it does something to ensure that there is sustainability, and that any action, for example, we try to reduce emissions in any work we do. Or for example, when we rebuild a building, when we help rebuild a building or a settlement, we'll ensure, for example, that there will be energy efficiency that is integrated in the design of that building. So there is, what's important there is that there's a lot of correlations in the work we do. And this really has to do fundamentally with an understanding of growth, not being, a static concept which would necessarily bring a benefit per se. So growth is very important for a country, but it's very important this growth does not go at the at the disadvantage of the environment, for example, of people, of the population, so that it also helps a country diversify, strengthen their human capitals, do their part to reduce emissions. So all those things are really connected, and a lot of the work of UNDP is to work with governments, but all other parts in societies, whether it is the private sector, the non-governmental sector, the donors, to make sure that these interventions are well integrated in these SDGs, well coordinated.
Actually, this document is very global, and UN on the halfway actually in implementation. Just 10 years left. What do you think? You are going on the right direction, or still you have a certain will need a certain changes to achieve the final goal?
There is no doubt that we are very much behind. The Secretary General of the United Nations, the head of UNDP, many others, UN officials have made that point very clearly. That's why we are now into what is called the decade of the action, which is really a call by the Secretary General to increase, to accelerate action towards climate change, towards SDG achievement. I mean, I talked about climate change because that's a very important one. Climate change targets involves a big reduction on emissions. Emissions have basically actually instead have grown until last year, which actually due to COVID, they've been slightly reduced. You would be surprised how little, in fact, have reduced. And with the growth that we anticipate after COVID is finished, again, if no specific measures are taken, unfortunately, we are looking at continued increased emissions. So the call is here for very urgent work, urgent action in all those areas. We are not at the moment meeting them, and I think it takes a very strong action and commitment on the part of governments around the world, but of full societies. How much the private sector, for example, can do to help reduce emissions. Not only those involved in fossil fuels, you know, emissions come from all parts of society. So if you can build something and you can build it in a green way, in a smart way, in a sustainable way, why not do that? If you can build buildings that are saving energy, why not do that?
Like in Geneva, there was a World Meteorological Station, eco building. They were just.
You have. I mean, you now have across even the European region, by now almost every country is building, is developing cities even that are energy efficient. They try to find ways for transport to be a transport of the future, no longer just reliance on vehicles, but think of an urban space, like an urban space that gives the possibility to use different type of transport. Yeah. Yes, of course, the turn to electric is very important. The turn to alternative source of energy using solar. There are countries in Europe, as you know, there are countries in Europe that have an objective by 2050 to be zero emissions. So to get there, you really need to have plans, you need to have investment, you need to have, and what's important here is that a lot of the investments can go alongside already your plan to invest. You just need to make sure that you use the climate lens through all the work that you do. A lot of it results in a better space even for the population, you know, a more livable space with more green, with more bicycle lanes, with more electric cars, with more buildings that are fueled maybe by renewable sources of energy. So I think this is a really opportunity, and I think we very much look forward to support Azerbaijan in this, also in this green economy objective, which, as you said, rightly so, is one of the objectives set out also by the president of the country.
Alessandro, we talk about environmental issues. For sure, it is challenges on 21st century. For sure, oil and gas production going on, emissions going, process, Middle East, North Africa. Budget format mainly because of oil and gas. It's a challenge, and we talk about Paris Agreement. We talk about SDG Agenda 2030. Paris Agreement and agenda of SDG. They go in line, or just it is like separate activities?
No, actually, they were both signed more or less at the same time in 2015. It was the same heads of states, the same governments that signed it, so they go perfectly in line. What we have, as I mentioned, in terms of implementation of Paris Agreement, it is very clear that with these targets set by each country, we will not be meeting neither the SDGs nor the climate targets. So what we've been calling for is for more ambitious emission reduction targets. What it means that every government needs to go a little bit further in what their plan and their target about reducing their emissions. Because at this level of emission, we do know that we will have an increase in the global average of temperatures. We will not be able to reduce this. We will have global increase in deaths for air pollution. We will have really very, very alarming consequences. One of the most alarming that the scientists are telling us is the weather will no longer be under our control.
Yeah.
And when we have that, when we as humans will not be able to foresee or even control that, we see some of these things happening around the world, then it may be late. So why not invest now to make sure that we reduce the possibilities of all these disasters that we are seeing already starting, but part of it is to adapt to it, to prepare for it, but part of it is really to try to do everything possible to prevent this scenario, to do that. And you see it by now, the consensus more and more is that you really need to reduce very dramatically your CO2 emission.
Yeah. When we talk about SDG agenda, for sure we put certain plans, but certain objective and subjective matters make some changes. One of them is COVID-19 that brought their own agenda that impacted world activities on certain lines. We just mentioned about environmental issues, industrial issues, reduction of emissions, CO emissions. I know that UNDP, for sure we talk about World Health Organizations that do their own job, but UNDP is very active on COVID-19, on pandemic. For sure all this impacts UNDP activity as well, and UNDP took a certain challenge and did a lot, and doing that, a lot of efforts to manage this process. What is main activities of UNDP aligned with COVID-19?
Yeah, so of course, as you said, the WHO is really the United Nations agency that has been responsible and very present in Azerbaijan on supporting the authorities on responding to COVID. We as UNDP have done a number of things. First of all, we made sure that all our programs were repurposed to ensure that they can still be effective at the time of COVID. So for instance, we work very closely with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of the Population on providing self-employment, or providing support for vulnerable people to obtain self-employment. In this case, it was people with disabilities, right?
Right.
So that involves a number of trainings, a number of physical activities like bringing this help. So what we did is we turned that into an online set of activities. We supported the ministry with a new online platform, with webinars, with classes, with trainings specifically tailored for self-employment beneficiaries. But at the same time, we are also working, for example, as you know, we have at the moment we have we are around 12 women resource centers around the countries. We've now recently established 3 in the areas close to the former line of contact. Those women resource centers have been particularly successful because we've provided networking possibility of women also in very affected regions, or regions that are maybe a little bit poorer, and that a lot of that required and was based on personal contact. So even in that, we've turned all our activities online for them. We provided as much help as possible in the early stage of the COVID, even on a humanitarian basis. The most desperate, the most poor families, we managed to provide them with packages and work, a package of food and other essential items. But mostly, we made sure that the investment was made on their skills, on them setting up their work, on their social networks, remained, that were not abandoned. Look, COVID-19, we in UNDP, we have already for the last 30 years, we measure the Human Development Index of every country around the world. It's a specific indicator. And I can tell you that for the first time in 2020, the level of development, global development, has for the first time reduced, has gone down. So it has since stable, and on a stable basis from 1990, it has been increasing solidly in every country mostly. And here we see for the first time globally that the level of development. So what it means is that a lot of hard gained gains, so to say, have reverted. So we are looking at hundreds of millions around the world of children that did not go to school for an entire year. We're looking at more people that went into poverty lines because, unfortunately, what we saw in COVID and the effect in COVID, that it was not necessarily a unifying situation. It may look so, everyone is in the same level, but what we see is that people that have
invisible part
that have a much better, that are more wealthy, they managed to get even more wealthy in some cases. Where we saw people that were struggling before that have gone down the poverty line, and a lot of people globally, as we see, have lost employment. In Azerbaijan, we have, along with all the UN agencies here, we have prepared a socioeconomic assessment of the consequences of COVID for the government on a number of areas, from health to social protection, and other relevant areas here, education, for example, that were important for the government to be able to take into account in terms of preparing their measures. Now, the government, of course, was very fast in providing support in the immediate aftermath. We know that they have been able to come up with important funding for vulnerable groups. But of course, this is the real impact of the entire society. We will only know probably with time. What we know is, growth, economic growth has gone into the negative last year. Now, of course, we are looking forward to the recovery and the response to the COVID in order to be able to see a sort of a growth again in the economy. Now, having said all that, UNDP also specifically invested in one specific area, which was the digital area. So we worked, for example, with the Ministry of Health to provide telehealth application and website and platforms for doctors to be able to, first of all, connect to each other, but also to connect to patients. We provide the bots for both Tabib and the Ministry of Health to be able to, so that people from home, they could get the information they needed. One of the biggest risks in this pandemic is the risk of misinformation.
Yeah.
So, that someone from home can digit a number on their WhatsApp and find out exactly the number of people that have cases, find out the do's and don'ts of COVID. And again, worked closely with the Ministry of Health on applications for, we call it from do-it-yourself doctor, so the person at home can go through a number of standard questions without having them to go
people
directly
with disabilities
to the
can use that. It was advantageous for them.
Yes, exactly.
Great project. Alessandro, we just talk about challenges of 21st century, and we talk about Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan recently regained back, we're just using UN terminology, regained back areas, just liberated areas, occupied for 27 years. And for sure, as a head of the republic, president of the state, mentioned about new approach for green energy, renewable energy, smart towns, smart cities projects. Talk about gender issues. At UNDP, very active. Talk about war, for sure. UNDP initiated new activities that call it Women, Peace and Security. Nowadays, it become on the top of agenda of country. Azerbaijan and UNDP did a great job, and globally, we talk about Istanbul Convention, for sure. It is one line has come to the gender issues, and we will come for sure later to the issues of recovery, because we will keep it for much pleasant, much interesting part of this. How is the activity in Azerbaijan going on? I know in certain countries in Balkans it's implemented on to a right way. Women, peace and security activities nowadays is also implementing in certain part of North Africa as well. And how is going on in Azerbaijan?
Let me say, UNDP here has been really involved for many years on the supporting the social and economic empowerment of women. I've mentioned earlier this Women Resource Center that we have. We work very closely with the State Committee on Families, Children and Women. And in a way, women is one of the, because of the importance of gender equality, is one of the groups that we have focused really much more in all this period. Women, as you mentioned, women in peace and security, women in the armed forces, women in the police, this is an incredibly important area of work. We stand by there to support any efforts of the government in that direction. We would look forward to some engagement in that area. Let me tell you one area that we are involved additionally is the question of gender-based violence. And here actually with our colleagues and in this case financial support of the USAID, we have just embarked last year into a whole new program on supporting government's efforts to fight gender-based violence. And we use our Women Resource Center around the country as let's say the place where, the areas where we can coordinate all this work. But of course we want also to support all possible efforts that are done in the country at the government level, through legislation, through shelters, through other levels, to make sure that the question of domestic violence is really faced. We know that this is a problem not only in Azerbaijan, we know that it's a global problem. It's often an issue of reporting. Some countries or some people will say, well, we don't have domestic violence. Well, we know that around the world, the statistics are very, very bad. We know that in the past, we have run surveys, and we know that at least once in their life, one woman out of two have been subjected to harassment or violence or based on their gender. So I think this is an area that requires a lot of work. And we are very pleased that we have good cooperation, excellent cooperation here to tackle those areas. And based on a lot of the programs that we are conducting, we hope that we can help the country make some important gains. You mentioned the Istanbul Convention. Of course, that is also a very important convention for every country to be seen, because that is a very concrete commitment that you do. Your parliament needs to, every parliament needs to ratify that, right? So, and that will have a sort of a roadmap of all measures that a government needs to take. So we very much look forward to support the government in hopefully one day to see a ratification of the convention.
Recently I read one article that mentioned during the COVID, level of domestic violation increased. Also because of...
That is a known fact. That is a known fact. And it's not difficult to see why. When people are... We all know how frustrating it is not to be able to go out of our house for very good reasons. I mean, it's very important that we are patient in this period until, hopefully one day soon we will all be able to, go out again. But at that time, we know how difficult it is. People may live in very close spaces, very small spaces sometimes. And unfortunately, we have seen an increase in domestic violence cases. And that's a very sorrow situation. Domestic violence often involves also violence against children, so not just against women. So it's very important that everything is done to fight this scourge. We take this extremely seriously. I think the government does too, and I think all the efforts that can be done should be done to fight it.
Thank you, Alessandro. I know you had a great experience in Balkans after the war. We just mentioned about post-war recovery, conflict assistance, and you spent there about 20 years. It was a difficult time. From my experience, I know that I was visiting you shortly, but you have a long time. Now we come after the war to come post-war recovery and conflict assistance issues. Azerbaijan for sure passed such a second war of patriotic war, and UNDP is an organization who is leading such kind of portfolios. From my own experience, I would like to mention that in 1998, Mine Action Agency was established by President of the State, Heydar Aliyev, and in 1999, UNDP provides the help and signed joint agreement about program, how to build a national capacity. And the capacity was built on very unique level that in 2007, even Kofi Annan, General Secretary of UN, in his speeches mentioned about one of the successful program of UNDPs of UN, and was mentioned Azerbaijan as well. I was really proud of that fact. Nowadays, program was nationalized and was running on a national level because capacity was built. Now we come to the question of post-war recovery. We will talk about global. How you see UNDP role in that?
As you said, thank you for asking me this question. Of course, UNDP has had a role in a number of countries in the immediate aftermath of the war. Our role is not only, I would say, but not specifically on humanitarian aid. We support countries also in that when it's needed, but our work starts really from the recovery period. And more it is understood that recovery starts very quickly, very soon after a disaster or a conflict. So we call it early recovery. As you said, we've been involved in this in several parts of the world, including the Balkans. And we've dealt with issues such as reconstructions of countries, support to local authorities. We call it livelihood, so to report the restart of the economy and to make sure that that people have ways of strengthening their income, to have some funds, to have some money, really. But also the area of demining, which you rightly alluded to. So in Azerbaijan, we have tried to provide immediate help in terms of, as I said, providing, for example, psychosocial help for families that were needed, or quick impact projects for population in need, in particular in the areas that are more close, that were conflict affected, right? And also we've done things such as we supported the Ministry of Communication, for example, ICT and Transport, to restore some of the internet capabilities that were affected and damaged during the conflict. But by far, I think at the moment, what we were asked also by the government, what we are trying to provide is really support in the area of mine action. And here, primarily, as you pointed out, having UNDP been there when ANAMA was established over 20 years ago, we were asked at the very start by ANAMA and the government to come in and run a needs assessment and provide recommendations for how to set up the demining effort, which we did. We had a team coming in together with our colleagues from UNMAS, and now again
have a chief technical advisor in the program from
chief
UNDP.
technical advisors and others, and then again here lately we've had a chance to meet with the new director of ANAMA and go over the type of support that is needed, but also to discuss with our partners how also they can work with us to support ANAMA and to support the demining effort. And I'm pleased to say there that I think we've been able, I think, to engage very successfully, very successful. Perhaps we have to wait, but very effectively at this stage with ANAMA, with the government, in providing at least at this stage recommendations on a number of things. On for example, on what to prioritize, on the legislation, on the strategy, on running a survey, of a new survey of the current situation, as you said, and I think also on providing international expertise, which I think it's very important at this stage, because the challenge is really immense, as we know. But I think there are ways that with the right experts, with the right people there, that this can be prioritized. You know, as you mentioned, the Balkans, there are many countries where we still have thousands, hundreds of thousands of hectares of land still mined. But for example, Croatia has entered the European Union. Croatia has a very effective, for example, mine action agency as well that have been cooperating also here with ANAMA. But
I was myself witnessing to get some relations with that.
I'm pleased to hear that, you know. So Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you know, they had the theater of a large war, where we now have apps established to make sure that people are alerted when they come close to a minefield. What I want to say is that you can rebuild, you can have a return of IDPs and refugees and others without having cleared everything. Yeah. But you need, of course, to prioritize this work, to have the right expertise, to have the right equipment, the right support. And you know, I know, of course, that the government is really looking at this. They are, you know, very actively engaged. They have prioritized this. They're really putting a lot of work with it. From our side, we can bring to bear the UN system support to that in various ways, through expertise, to financing, and to others. I'm pleased to say we've managed to mobilize around $1 million already to support ANAMA in a number of areas, including mine risk education, but mostly
mine victim assistance also.
You know, a lot of the training, the equipment, the capacity building, because it's what is clear that the aftermath of this conflict are, you know, different. This was a different conflict, and so the aftermath is also different. And so you need to upgrade this knowledge, this capacity, this equipment to be able to tackle this very large, you know, consequences. Let me tell you here that I was also honored to have been invited as all the colleagues in the diplomatic corps to visit some of these areas. And I have to say, you know, that what you see there is really an area that requires a full, the challenge is enormous. The destruction is unbelievable, you know, and it really reminds me of other places where you know, we can certainly discuss the various areas. I think those areas really it's very difficult. I think even to get a parallel of the level of destruction and the level of mine contamination needs to be clearly understood. There has to be specific maps, new maps that are being drawn through a clear technical and non-technical survey. Yeah, exactly. All those areas that you know very well, that needs to be done, and I'm sure it will be done in the country. So we are here really to support that. I know there are partners out there very willing to support, and you know, we're really looking forward to be able to be as useful as possible to the government in this huge challenge that they have. Now, the other question that you mentioned is the recovery of those areas, and of course, demining is the first priority, because you cannot have return of even IDPs without a safe environment for their return, exactly. A dignified environment, you know. But once you move to that stage, then of course you're talking about providing infrastructure, basically physical infrastructure, social infrastructures. You're looking at buildings, you're looking at local authorities being equipped to be able to be efficient in running this. So all of that a lot of this is a work that of course we have a certain expertise, not only us, but other UN agencies have, and I think we can be very helpful to the government in the recovery of those territories.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Əziz dostlar, bugünkü verilişin qonağı BMT İnkisaf proqramının ölkə üzrə Rezident Nümayəndəsi cənab Alessandro FRAKASSETTI idi. Gələn görüşlərə dək.